Hello, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we are going to be talking about the last episode of Ms. Marvel, and I'm really excited to jump into this. I've been a bit busy lately, so I wasn't able to put out the video just yet. So here we are. I'm in a hotel room, and I thought, you know what? Let's just put it out in one take and see how it goes, because I really won't have the time to edit for quite some time since I'm out of training for work. That being said, I think that this episode was fantastic. I mean, I was a little down on episode number 5, but looking back, I mean, I think that this episode does fill in everything that it needed to end off the series. There are still some issues with episode 5 that I feel that are valid, so if you want to check that out, please go ahead and do so. That being said, this actual episode, though, it is very, very fun, and it finishes everything off and with like a nice little bow before going into the Marvels. And I do think that the main draw for this episode is, of course, the final battle with Damage Control, who you essentially hate throughout this series because of how incompetent and stupid they're acting the entire time. It's just very unfortunate because I believe that they were founded by Tony Stark after the Battle of New York. I think that's something that we find out in one of the first Spider-Man films, so that is very unfortunate. But also, on the other hand, we get to see a reconciliation with Kamala and her family. So those two elements are the main pieces of this episode, and I think that the show does a good job of balancing the two and tying everything up. Without further ado, if you have not watched the episode yet, please click off and come back afterwards. So let's first start off with actually saving Kamran. Now, this is something that, as I said, is a big piece of the episode. He's running away from Damage Control, and now there's a final battle at the school. They go through the mosque earlier as well, and there's this whole thing in which, like, there's a lot of a community element that seems to be here, in which they're trying to protect someone that they know isn't actually a bad person. The only thing that seems to be wrong here is that Kamran just happened to have abilities, and I think that it's kind of implied that the Damage Control agent is kind of racist. I mean, it's very, very weird in terms of the way that she's acting, and I think that it just kind of follows that narrative. I mean, I wasn't expecting that, right? And I think that it was kind of played up a bit more in this episode with how she's kind of like defending herself, also with how like she's interacting with everyone else. It seems to be the case here, which, I mean, there are racist people out there, so I understand why potentially that's something that they would want to do in the episode. I just didn't get it as much previously. I just thought that she was kind of dumb in terms of how she was acting and how she was interacting specifically with like people of the Muslim faith, people who were not just like, I don't know, white. It was very, very weird in terms of how she was interacting previously in the mosques and stuff like that. So I wasn't sure if that was just her lack of understanding or if that was actually something that was intentional. And in this episode, it made it seem a lot more like it was something that she was just not able to comprehend, and also potentially that she was being prejudiced towards these people on purpose. So I thought that was interesting. But overall, I think the idea that this episode was them saving Kamran, it was also twofold, because there's this whole idea that Kamran doesn't know what happened to his mother and what exactly is going to be the reaction that he's going to have based off of that. So that whole element of potentially having to stop him from losing control of his abilities and, you know, having to safely escape without harming others, that was a very, very interesting element of this show, of this episode specifically as well. Now let's also talk about the family element. Now, I think that this show does a very wonderful job with having the family feel very, very real, and also like the family element doesn't necessarily have to be the entire episode. When it does shine, definitely, but this episode shows that even though it wasn't, say, the biggest component, I think saving Kamran was the biggest aspect of this episode, but the moments that we have with the family in which the mom's trying to just tell or get Kamala to tell the family, and then finding out that the family already knows, stuff like that. I mean, it's very, very fun to see, and all of that definitely complements the overarching plot, and I think that that's the main strength of this show, which is Kamala's family. Yeah, apart from that, I don't have much more to say on that. I mean, I just thought it was funny that, the dad listens to the phone on speaker, and so everyone else can hear what's going on. I mean, it just seems very, very authentic with how they're treating the family, and that's been the same ever since episode number 1. Now, I do think that damage control itself is a huge failure of an institution in this entire show, and it is a bit frustrating to me, and I think it's supposed to be frustrating to a lot of people, which is why I kind of give it a pass, but still I'm like, damage control could just be burned to the ground, and I don't think anyone would really care. Specifically after what happens in this episode, I mean, the final battle, they lose to a bunch of kids, which is really, really hilarious. And I mean, that's really funny, but also the actions of the head lady, I don't know what her name is, that is working with damage control are ridiculous. And I kind of briefly mentioned this a second ago, in which it's almost like, are you doing this because you have some type of prejudice? I don't really know how much of that is what they were intending to do there, and how much of that was just how the character was written and stuff like that. Like how much of that was intentional, I have no idea, but it just felt like it was a potentially prejudice type of situation, especially because of the statement where she was like, people like this shouldn't get powers, and then the other guy that was right next to her has to clarify, and even though she says that that's not what she was talking about, there is a question mark there, and I do think that she kind of becomes a character that we could just be like, okay, damage control is incompetent, and with the way that you're acting, it's like, can we just destroy this? Like, we don't want this. Let's just bring back S.H.I.E.L.D., bring back Nick Fury, bring all that back. That's what we actually want. But in terms of the actual fight, I think it was well choreographed. I thought it was a lot of fun. We got to see Kamala be kind of like a strategist and everyone working together. Even like the popular character from the first episode. I mean, it was interesting to see her actually come back with just 1 episode to spare. I think it would have been more interesting to see her develop more of a relationship with Kamala earlier on. But again, I think that's just an episode time constraint type of issue, and we get what we get at this point, right? But that being said, with her joining in, I think that she was fine with how she was in this episode as well. Also, I feel like we could have gotten a bigger conversation with Nakia and stuff like that, but again, there was a bit of a rush at this last episode in terms of having some things that just had to be a little bit glossed over. So, obviously, at the end of this fight, damage control loses. We get a lot of cool elements of Kamala and Kamran using their abilities. And next, after that happens, of course, we have Kamran escaping and ending up going to Red Dagger. So I'm very curious specifically as to whether or not we're going to get some team-ups from these two characters, how we're going to see them in the future. I really hope that this isn't the end of them. They're not just sitting in Pakistan and we're just assuming that they're training or whatever. I don't want that to be the case. I really hope that we get to see more from the two of them, because they are decent enough characters that I would like them to become bigger pieces of the MCU, especially with the more global scale that things seem to be going in so far in Phase 4. That being said, I mean, I don't have much more to say on that particular aspect, so let's move into the post-credit scene. And that, of course, is what we end up seeing with Carol Danvers. This is, of course, a element that's going to come into play for the Marvels, in which Kamala's just chilling in her room, and all of a sudden, she gets blasted, I guess, halfway across the universe, and Carol Danvers is in her place. And I wasn't expecting this. Honestly, at first, I thought that Kamala had actually transformed into Carol, because that's something that happens in the comics, and I believe that's like the issue 1 of the comics. That's how it works, where she also has a shape-shifting ability, and I initially thought that that's what was happening, but it doesn't seem like that's the case considering how she reacted and all that stuff. So that being said, I'm curious to know more about how that's going to play into the Marvels, and I'm excited to jump into that movie whenever that comes out. Overall, I really enjoyed this show. I think it was a wonderful series, and it's probably at the top 1 or 2 spots of all the Disney Plus shows that we've seen so far. Let me know Let me try that again. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this episode. I know, there wasn't much editing or anything, so hopefully I didn't screw up too badly. If you liked the video, please like the video and subscribe for more videos from me on this channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Have a wonderful day. Bye.